Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody here today for what I'm sure will be another really fantastic session with senior leaders who are working very hard every day to try to take care of the logistics community. I hope that you will take an opportunity to chat with our senior leaders as we do this panel today. They'll do their best to answer questions during this session. So feel free to jump on board and ask questions. This is a rare opportunity to be able to engage with folks who operate at this level. I'd like to also welcome and thank sincerely the panelists that we have today. I know that your calendar is a nightmare and that you're juggling 100 issues or more every day. So thank you for making time to be here and for your continued support of LOA. I'd also like to thank the LOA Executive Board and Event Power because this is obviously a challenging time. Doing this virtually may not be the ideal situation, but it's certainly better than a kick in the head. So thanks for making this happen. And it is important that we meet and talk and continue to take care of our community and our DOD and our nation as we continue to move forward and make things better. So thank you very much for tuning in today. Before we start in with the questions, I'd like to give each of our panelists a chance to make some opening comments as it ties to the theme of this year's symposium, which is Under Attack, Agile Logistics for the Future Fight. So Mr. Marani, sir, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. And thank you, LOA, for hosting today's panel discussion. It's a pleasure to be here with the other distinguished members and friends. So logistics under attack and our ability to remain agile and adapt to changing threat environments is really an extremely timely theme for this year's symposium. So across the department, there's been this renewed focus and urgency for confronting, what we're calling the contested logistics environment. Warfare in the future is going to be unrestricted. So this means geography is no longer a strategic advantage the U.S. maintains. So we can expect our adversaries to challenge our logistics dominance from the homeland to the battle space, using all means available, all domains, and in ways we previously not considered, from cybersecurity threats to challenging our ability to project from within our borders. So the national COVID pandemic, for example, and our response provided an excellent example of a contested logistics environment. It was principally contested through competition for scarce resources. And that's because production capacity to respond, and I mean the world's production capacity to respond, was really sized based on a steady demand signal. And there was limited capacity to immediately respond to this huge surge in consumption. Getting PPE and medical equipment, screening and testing materials, vaccines, in the right quantities to the right point of need at the right time, that's been at the center of our national dialogue for the past year. So I think this pandemic has really taught the nation just how critical logistics capability is to our medical readiness, the nation's ability to respond to a national healthcare crisis, for example. So in contrast, if we were to be ready to respond to a military crisis, we recognize that full integration of logistics planning into our O-plan development is critical to ensuring the warfighter can actually execute their warfighting concepts unconstrained by logistics. So as such, this requires, this balance, I call it, between developing new capabilities and sustaining our current capabilities. It's this balance between structural readiness. Do I have the right force structure, and can it accomplish the kinds of missions that I need it to? And then our current operational readiness. Is my force proficient and adequately equipped and provisioned to fight now and for the duration that we would expect? So both structural and operational readiness must be adequately resourced to ensure we can win today, but maintain the superior technological advantage, to deter and defeat threats of the future, right? So logistics and sustainment accounts also must be consistently resourced to achieve this operational readiness level, right? And this means having parts on the shelf. We have to have depth in the shelf to meet this surge in consumption. If we had had that for our COVID crisis, we would have not had the kind of conditions we had. So it's the same thing. We have to have that level ready and available in ability to meet that surge while our supply chains can catch up. So let me end with this comment. Logistics requirements are not optional or any less important than operational or mission requirements. Whether designing new capabilities or sustaining existing capabilities, they are essential to the performance of our weapon systems. They are part of the military readiness insurance policy that we provide the nation, and we really need to treat them as equals. So with that, I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks very much, sir. Really appreciate that. Mr. Stamey, sir, over to you.
I'm on mute button there. So Kevin, so I'll keep my introductory remarks pretty short so we can get into the questions. But let me just hit on a few things. So the symposium theme is logistics under attack, and we've known this for many years, but it's certainly been demonstrated this year that the most likely place our logistics kill chain is going to be under attack is in the cyber domain. And so hopefully we'll get into that in the questions. And I do have some thoughts, and that is not just in the logistics domain, but in many of our domains. It's the cyber area that keeps me up at night. And there's been some recent events that we'll talk about that really heighten our need to talk about this and think about our architecture for logistics IT going forward. I think it's important to think about that architecture, and if we're going to do thousands of kill chains in very short periods of time, it's going to depend on a logistics infrastructure that's going to have near perfect information to respond to that. And so the architecture of our logistics systems and depending on a cloud infrastructure are going to be critical for our logistics logisticians and our logistics system to respond to those kind of things. And so hopefully we'll have some time to talk about our infrastructure and the importance of moving to the cloud, or importance of moving to DevSecOps and agile software development, and how those tools are going to truly enable our logisticians and warfighters to be agile and respond to our emerging threats. And I'll stop there.
Okay, sir. Great. Thanks very much. You must have seen my list of questions that I've got progged for you. So Ms. Timofichik, ma'am, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kevin, for the invite to be part of this panel today and to be able to speak to you, Log Nation. My only regret is we weren't there in person at one of my happy places, Hill Air Force Base. So hi to Colonel Ken Benton, who is our conference chair. So I'm excited to talk to you today about the acquisition side of logistics, which you'll hear the term product support, right? I know that's not the majority of Log Nation, but I'm hope to provide some thoughts to you so you can see how Digital Air Force, how that impacts you as a maintainer, a logistician, and how we can get better insight into our product support requirements moving forward. I will give a plug for two papers that were published by Kevin and my former boss, Dr. Will Roper, the former service acquisition executive. You can find them on Google. I'll be happy to put them in chat if you'd like. And the first one is There Is No Spoon, and the second one is Bending the Spoon. The titles sound a little bit awkward, but they're written along the theme of the Matrix movie. And they give the backdrop of what we mean when we talk about digital acquisition. And it's formed around, first I'll say that There Is No Spoon is primarily on the development side of the house, but the Bending the Spoon is what makes me excited, is what does that mean to the legacy platforms, and how do we bring them into the digital environment? So I encourage you to read that. The backdrop behind those papers is what's called a digital trinity: open systems architecture, cloud-based agile software development, you heard Mr. Stamey talk about, and as well as digital engineering. And digital engineering is really what people focus on when they talk about digital Air Force, but it's much bigger than that. When we think about open system architecture on the hardware side, we think about that agile software software controlled capabilities on a rapid continual basis. What does that mean for logistics? What does that mean for maintenance? And how do we incorporate ourselves in that design and in that future state when we are moving, we are committed as a digital Air Force? So we'll talk about some of the traditional things that AQD talks about. Mr. Marani talked about the contested environment, the supply chain that we saw, the issues that we saw with the COVID response. We'll talk about that hopefully. And then a little bit more onto the digital, hopefully in the Q&A. So with that, thank you again, Kevin.
Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, Mr. Marani, we're going to start with you. I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, from your vantage point, how has information technology transformed the way the Department of Defense manages logistics?
Yeah, so thanks, Kevin, for that question. So I think Angie's lead-in is just a great example of how information is really changing how we design and how we manage. I mean, this question is great because there's so many directions we can go with this, right? But I think Angie hit on a really important area, taking advantage of the digital thread and the digital environment, and to do things more rapidly, to operate in a shared environment, to test, to war game. So there's tremendous advantage there. Again, it has opened up access to information and has allowed us to integrate and interface with systems too. So I think in the log space, all of our logistics systems, being able to put data in a shared cloud environment and leverage the power of that data to make decisions, right? Decision support is really the outcome that we're looking for to make better decisions faster. I'll give you a couple of examples of where we in the department are headed. So you may have heard of a system or a capability called Advana. It stands for Advanced Analytics. So, at the department level, we have a cloud environment that numerous data systems are feeding that we can make decision quality information for finance, for weapon systems. We had a great discussion yesterday on how we're going to move one of our systems that we've been managing for about 16 years called the Maintenance, Availability, and Data Warehouse that has literally billions of records that we can leverage that information, put it in that data environment, and again, get after things like condition-based maintenance, for example. Again, moving from a reactive approach to a predictive approach, and really reduce our log footprint and understand when systems are going to break so that we can reduce that unscheduled time. So those are two examples. The final one I'll talk about is an initiative that was born out of the logistics reform efforts that the department has been working on for the last 4 years. And this was in partnership with the services. It's called Munitions Readiness Initiative. And again, it's another decision support tool. It's an application that actually resides in Advana. And it really opens our eyes to from manufacture all the way to the point of use in the field, our status of munitions. So manufacturing, inventory, consumption, lets us know, our condition, where they are, and what the impacts of using those munitions are in those different scenarios. So very powerful tool, but it's really the power of our IT and our data analytics that has enabled this. And I'll pause there.
Great. Thanks very much, sir. Yeah, that certainly seems to be the focus of a lot of things that we're doing these days is how can we take all the data we have and turn it into usable, actionable information for us? So I appreciate your response there. Mr. Stamey, you mentioned in your opening comments about what keeps you up at night, and you were talking about cyber. So when I say the phrase solar winds, does that send chills up and down your spine? And can you tell me what that event, how that's going to affect Agile Logistics in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is a question that keeps me up at night. And if you work for the Department of Defense, work with the Department of Defense, and you have not heard the term solar winds, you probably need to do some homework. It should keep all of us up at night. You may recall back at, I think it was the 2019 LOA, that there were several presentations that mentioned a similar but different nation-state cyber attack called NotPetya. And it was an attack against the Ukraine government. And that attack happened through a software company. And that software company was essentially Ukraine's TurboTax. And so it was a great platform to launch an attack, because every business, every personal tax done in the Ukraine used this tax software. So it was persistent throughout Ukraine. One of the victims of that attack was the Maersk Shipping Company. And so they were one of the people that ended up getting that NotPetya virus. And it's essentially was a ransomware virus that shut down this global shipping company for several days. It cost them an estimated $10 billion to recover from that. So it was a very malicious attack. But this year we had another cyber warfare attack that was really even worse and definitely more sophisticated than the attack on the Ukraine. And that attack was the SolarWinds attack. The NotPetya attack was through a software company. It was frankly ill prepared to deal with the security challenges of defending themselves against a nation state. The SolarWinds attack was against a cybersecurity company who essentially does performance monitoring software that we put on our IT networks. They were a company that claims to be a cybersecurity that should have been better prepared for this. And the thing that really keeps me up at night about this is, when I use the word loosely, SolarWinds attack, the attack frankly has yet to happen. What we saw and what we've uncovered was really what we call prep in the battle space. And so we don't know yet what payloads might have been delivered through that SolarWinds attack. And so we're still, and all of us, the reason I say it should keep us all up at night is all of us and all the cybersecurity experts in the Department of Defense and the companies that support the Department of Defense need to be peeling back their software development environments to figure out, was there a payload left behind because of their use of the SolarWinds software? And so I'm very concerned about this, because the Department of Defense was most likely the target for those payloads, and certainly the logistics environment is one of those areas that could potentially have been a target, as well as the software development happening on many of our weapon systems. But a lot of the IT tools that we use were also developed on some of the tools that are supported by SolarWinds. And so I'll leave it there, and we could probably talk more at a different level, but it really is one of those things that I think all of us should worry about and figure out how we're going to, despite all of that, why we need to figure out how to operate under attack.
Understood. Yeah, I thought that might get you going. So thank you, sir, for your comments on that. Ma'am, I can't pick up my phone or get on my laptop on a news source without seeing something about the F-35. Obviously, it's a huge program, very important to our nation, important to the Department of Defense and a lot of our partners too around the world. I wanted to get your take on where you think we need to go with sustainment of the F-35 and how we can go about getting where we need to be to to get an affordable, robust sustainment capability by 2025? Just put a mark out there. And I know that's a loaded question, but I'm sure you can address it, and I'll thank you in advance.
2025 is going to be a stretch, but let's see. There's all different flavors of articles that you mentioned on the F-35 out in the news, and they're good, they're bad, they're in between. F-35 is a phenomenal 5th generation fighter. However, we have many cost issues facing us that are collectively challenges affordability, right? So the Air Force needs fully mission capable F-35s at a price we can afford too. When I say we, the Air Force, but I think I could probably also speak for the Navy and Marine Corps when I say we've got to work on the affordability. We have limited resources that we could put against that program, any program for that matter. And if we can't find ways to make the program significantly more affordable, we're going to be faced with buying less, flying less, or alternative mix of that. So let me also state the obvious that everybody in the room knows: the lion's share of the life cycle costs are in sustainment. 70 to 80% is nominally the number you look at, and that's F-35 included. So it's really important that we start looking and thinking collectively on how we can bring our collective thoughts together to attack that affordability problem. We recognize this across the board. Like I said, it's not just on the F-35, and we have in our business practices a process set up to routinely throughout the weapon system lifecycle look at the decisions we made in sustainment and go back and revalidate. And we do that through what's called a product support business case analysis. And the F-35 is currently ongoing one of those. So they're looking at what the current sustainment choices are, and then some options moving forward. So we as an Air Force, we believe that the supply chain management function, for example, is one thing that we could do as an organic option. So right now, the prime vendor, the Lockheed Martin, is the supply chain manager. And so one of the options that they're looking at in that product support business case is organic supply chain management function. So that would be through the Air Force, and we're already using DLA for the Air Force to support the Air Force and to do that organically through our 448th. They're looking at you said 2025. So let me clarify. The BCA is looking at long-term sustainment options. So we are right now pursuing the path for a 5-year performance-based logistics supply chain demand reduction PBL with Lockheed. So let me make that clear. We are looking at beyond that. So what can we do beyond that long-term to address affordability? It's just one of the areas that we believe we could do better organically. There are other options as well, but it is a main focus of the BCA that's going on now. So the BCA there's an independent contractor that's doing the analysis, and they're doing the cost analysis associated with the different COAs, courses of actions. And then once that BCA is done, it's imminent. I did not look up the date, sorry, but the results go to the decision makers, right? And so even though the Air Force believes that organic supply chain management is a viable option, we've got to look at the analysis coming out of the BCA, and then it goes to the decision makers. And although we have the largest fleet of F-35s, we are by far the decision maker in the process, and that decision process within the F-35 is significantly more involved than most other programs too. So we're one vote in that process. But yes, we would like to look at more options for organic that will address the affordability issue post 2025.
Okay. All right. I guess I was being a little aggressive there. I apologize.
Aggressive.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. So Mr. Marani, back to you. So Mr. Stamey was talking about cyber and how it needs to keep us up at night, or should keep us up at night, unfortunately, as we work to resolve concerns and threats there. I'd be very interested in your take, sir, on what we can do from your vantage point to mitigate some of those cyber security threats, and how we can protect and preserve our supply chain and the overall logistics community as we continue to face these cybersecurity threats.
Well, thank you for that simple question.
Welcome.
But before I get started, I'd like to just put a exclamation point. I'm a believer, Ms. T, in your strategy. So I think we need to have an organic capability. I think it's inherent to our governmental responsibility to meet our core requirement. And I look forward to that continued dialogue. But I think Mr. Stamey did a great job of laying out that attack and what that means to us, and really we don't know what we don't know yet about what that attack did. So it is scary. And to kind of leverage the first question you had, we're relying on digital, far more than at any point in our history. So what have we done with that? So great tools, delivers great capability in a variety of ways, but it also creates this huge attack surface, we'll call it. And we talked about this in our DoD sustainment series recently. You created an attack surface, and so that created a consequence, and we're living those consequences now. So how do we get after that? So some of the things that we're doing is through exercises and different studies that we're sponsoring to try to understand and simulate, what these attacks will do to our supply chain, so that we can, uncover some of the gaps and risks in our supply chains. So these kind of things are embedded in different joint exercises through intelligence exercises. Many in the community are looking at this problem, trying to understand what the implications are, so we can mitigate those impacts. Another thing that we've done, we rely heavily on our commercial industrial base partners, right? We call that the defense industrial base, and we cannot do our jobs without them. They're the ones who manufacture our systems and the parts that we use. So we've created this thing called the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification program. So you may have heard of this. This is really, the intent of this is to really increase the assurance for the department that our DIB partners, right, have taken measures to mitigate their threats. So that is going to be key to our ability to be secure. So the threat that Mr. Stamey outlined, we're against these companies that, we heavily rely on. I think, again, what keeps me up at night is not what we know, but we don't know, right? There's so much out there, and with any adversary and with any deterrence or mitigation, once we close a gap, they will look for the next gap, right? So this will be an ongoing challenge for us. And the more dependent we are on data, again, the larger attack surface we have, and the more we have to be concerned about this. But we can go on the offensive well, and that's probably a discussion for a later time. Over.
Yeah, very, very interesting, and a huge challenge for sure. Mr. Stamey, when I retired 3 years ago from the Air Force, I think there were roughly 450 IT systems inside the logistics community. Grew up with a lot of those. And I know there are changes in sundowning of a number of different systems and so on. But I'm curious, sir, how, as we progress down this path of adjusting our IT infrastructure, what can be done? What is being done to make sure that all the data that we need can be shared amongst the remaining systems to make it available to everybody who needs it, and to harness the power of that data, like we talked about before, to make it information that everybody who needs access to it can get it. And we can do amazing things with hopefully clean data that's now powerful information.
Yeah, thanks. So let me just with a little vignette from my last job. So as we were preparing for trying to figure out how prepared we were for an attack on the Korean Peninsula, a part of my organization was pulling together information for Air Force leaders that was just as you described, stovepipe in very different parts of our Air Force. And they literally had to manually pick up the phone and call people and said, can you send me this data? And so they would take that data, manually dump it into a spreadsheet, build a set of charts. That process is very inefficient, especially if we're going to translate that into warfighting concepts. So let me hit on why we need this ubiquitous access to logistics data, and then I'll come back to how we're going to do that, how we're going to collapse some of those systems so that we have ready access to some of that data. So hopefully most of you have heard of our JADC2 concept, which is connecting sensors and shooters and decision makers and warfighters through this mesh network. And that JADC2 concept from a warfighting perspective will enable us to automate machine-to-machine communication based on access to that data to conduct thousands of kill chains in very short periods of time. But that vision depends and is underpinned by our logistics infrastructure that's going to have to rearm and reconstitute those weapon systems. So LOGC2 and Agile Logistics has to be there, and we'll have to have this ubiquitous access to our networks and our data. And so our ability to provide that timely, actionable logistics data depends on the creation of this federated data architecture, not the old stovepipe architectures that require manual systems and the systems don't talk to each other, especially in the face of the cyber threats we've been talking about. So it's much more difficult to take out a mesh network than it is to take down an individual stovepipe. And that's why this is absolutely critical that we move to a federated mesh architecture. But that architecture is also an enabler for the things that logisticians want to do. So it'll enable access to modern tools. Mr. Marani mentioned one of those, Advana. Advana would be a very difficult tool to utilize if it had to go look at lots of different things. It works much more effectively when all of that data is in the same place, in the same format, and it's clean. We actually spend a lot of money on exquisite tools, and I won't mention particular vendors' names here, but we spend a lot of money on some of those exquisite tools that do in fact go mine data out of all of those different data stovepipes, but that's not the future. But then some of the things we're doing in the Air Force to get after this problem, Steve and I, both in our last jobs, were working on something called BLADE, the Basing Logistics Analytic Data Environment. That is going to be the key, the center point for logistics data. So we're trying to collapse many of those data systems, and BLADE will be our standard data repository and our data platform for logistics data. CBM Plus, most of they currently great tools, great predictive analytics, but there's we're still debating, but that will likely end up in something like BLADE, so that we don't have to have a separate data platform just to support CBM Plus. LIMS EV is another set of data we're looking at. Where does LIMS EV belong, so that we don't have to create a separate data environment for LIMS. Project Brown Heron, some of you may have heard, is something we launched to look at COVID response, but that's another one, very powerful tool. We pay a lot of money. Project Brown Heron pulls in a lot of data, visualizes that data, so we have decision quality information rather than just data. But again, another opportunity for us to find a common data platform to move that. And so those are just a few that I'll mention, but there's still more work to be done. We're not there yet, But that is the vision of the Air Force, is to move towards, as our chief data officer says, hashtag not 30.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. It's a huge challenge. Ms. Timofejchik, got one question for you. We got a lot of work to do. How are we going to afford it? Is there, with the budget constraints that we have and the potential for it to be even more challenging in the future, how are we going to get all this work done to sustain our legacy and our future weapon systems?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I already mentioned limited resources, right? That's a big concern. And the Air Force has multiple efforts aimed at reducing sustainment costs in the legacy systems and in the new weapon systems being developed. And that includes many that are currently ongoing in the Rapid Sustainment Office, which you heard about earlier in the conference here. CBM Plus, Kevin just mentioned, looking at so it's resources, it's time and money and people. So CBM Plus is getting at all of those: artificial intelligence, advanced manufacturing, robotics, to include depot and the flight line. All of those things, technologies being brought in through the Rapid Sustainment Office. They have been so successful since the last LOA that I don't know if they specifically announced it in the forum, that they went from being an initiative to a permanent PEO. So that's a huge step. That's an investment the Air Force, an acknowledgement that the Air Force made to say they're doing really awesome things. We want them to continue. There are other efforts going on too, Tesseract. So, right, Tesseract, and they're looking at technology applications as well as process improvements, theory of constraints, time and money, right? That's limited budget resources and looking at how we can better focus the things that we have. Now, with respect to the new programs, I mentioned in the comments, Air Force Acquisition is going digital, and we've launched the digital campaign in partnership with Air Force Materiel Command to look at ways that we can better design sustainment, design for sustainment, as well as provide those rapid capability upgrades and updates. The B-21 is a really good example. So just in the last couple of weeks, there was an Air Force magazine article that talked about the good things going on in B-21 program. And specifically, they talked about pilots and maintainers that are embedded in the facilities with the designers. And they're giving real-time feedback on things that work, things that don't work. In that Air Force magazine article, so our former boss, Dr. Roper, is quoted in there, and he says, I quote, B-21 is being designed for production innovation, for maintainability and sustainability, end quote. And I use terms that I learned through DAU, right? So up front, we are designing for sustainment through our sustainment strategy. In design, we're designing this support through the reliability and maintainability metrics that we have, and then we're supporting the design. So if we have that continual focus through our digital processes, we can do that feedback. I know for a fact that B-21 is thinking about logistics. So they're pushing decisions back into the design based on logistics that are currently in theater. So having that feedback loop that says, I am focused on maintainability and sustainability in the systems that are currently in design. So through that, call it the digital thread, call it the digital acquisition process, however you want to call it, we have the opportunity to bake in affordability.
It's a big task, but it's the only way we have, and that's to be more efficient and continue to make improvements that our young airmen and other service members are finding in the operation, ways of becoming more efficient. So thank you, ma'am. Okay, we're quickly running out of time, unfortunately. So I'm going to ask you a question, each of you roughly the same question. And if I could get a quick answer back from you, I'd appreciate it. But you know, who am I to say how long you're going to talk? Mr. Marani, we're going to start with you. you're in the cafeteria or one of the eating establishments in the Pentagon, and who in the world walks up to you but Secretary Austin? He says, Steve, what do you need from me? What can I do for you today to help make your job easier and to help our service and the whole Department of Defense? What do you say?
Sir. Quickly, I think the first thing that came to mind is resources. We need our secretary to help advocate for the appropriate resources. You know, we have this discussion in the building quite a bit where we have authorizers and appropriators, and authorizers ask us to do many things, but oftentimes they don't come with resources. We have a lot of problems to solve, right? And but we need to be resourced appropriately to go after those problems, and we need to balance how we apply those resources. But advocacy to ensure that we get the resourcing and that it's in a predictive manner and that our budget is approved on time so that we really get to make use of the full fiscal year to apply those resources. And I'll stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Mr. Stamey, who do you run into over at the, oh, he left. No, there he's back. You run into the chief of staff and he says, Kevin, man, you're doing a great job. What do you need from me? What can I do for you to make your job better and to help the Air Force out?
Yeah, so yes, sir. Thank you so much for the question. I think one of the most difficult challenges that we as a department have is funding cross-cutting enterprise level efforts, because we're typically funded along programmatic lines, and it's difficult to fund and defend in our budget process these cross-cutting initiatives. And so one of those cross-cutting initiatives is, you know, building up our IT infrastructure, building up our cloud computing infrastructure, building up Platform One. As Steve mentioned, resources to do that has been a tremendous challenge for the Air Force. And I'm personally engaged in that dogfight, weekly. But it really is critical for us to get to JADC2, to get to Agile Logistics, Log IT, all the things that we want to do as an Air Force, as a department, depend on a robust infrastructure that we're not investing enough in.
Okay, I hear you, and it's not surprising. It's a tough challenge. Ma'am, over to you. You run into your favorite senior leader who gives you a question and says, hey, give me your elevator pitch on what we need to do for you, Angie. How can I help you today?
You're going to think I'm cheating, but I'm going to take a little bit of what both Steve and Kevin said. So resources, bottom line, people. So when we talk about B-21 having those maintainers embedded in the program office, that's a resource drain. We don't necessarily have the numbers of people that we can cross into the new development program. So we need to get ahead of the power curve in terms of that early designing for sustainment, but also resources. When we're talking about RSO or modernizing our depots, to Kevin's point, the cross-cutting technologies, the cross-cutting capabilities don't sell well, quite honestly, and they're hard to get adopted as we're having to deal with multiple approval authorities, multiple funding sources, you name it. So our depots have aging facilities. We know that. We know we can put more technologies in them that returns in terms of aircraft returning to the field. We can do that, flow day reduction. Kevin's gonna be sorry, I forgot that term, but people and cross-cutting technologies and infrastructure.
Right. Well, obviously there's a thread that runs through all three of your answers, and it ties back to resources. So I really desperately wish we had more time to talk right now. I had a whole list of questions for you, but I greatly appreciate you making time out of your tremendously busy schedules to join today, and for the answers that you provided. And again, for the folks out in the audience, wow, what a great opportunity to hear from some of your senior leaders about the challenges they're facing every day to try to make our community better and to take care of us and to continue to move the DoD and our nation forward in some really challenging times. So again, thank you very much to the three of you for being here today, for what you do for us, and look forward to continuing to work with you in the future, and hope to see you next year in person, ma'am, out in Salt Lake City as we work our way through all the COVID challenges. Hopefully we'll all be able to be together in person next year. So thank you very much, Log Nation, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kevin.
Kevin.